I'm continuing to work my way through this volume of classical tragedy, Greek and Roman, and I have now finished off all the Greek authors in this volume: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Now, I didn't really know much about any of this before starting this volume, but it turns out that these are the only three surviving Greek tragic playwrights that we have. Of course, back in the day, there were many more, but those many more have not survived to us. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides are the only ones who survived. If you include comedies and other genres, there are more Greek playwrights who have survived to us. But counting the tragedies, it's only Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Now, this volume only includes two of each. There are more surviving plays from each of these. I think especially Euripides, we have a lot more of his plays. Although we don't have all of them for any of them. So for all of these authors, we are missing plays. But anyways, that brings us to the end of the Greek authors in this volume. So it's now time to move on to the Roman part of classical tragedy, Greek and Roman, which brings us to Seneca. Now again, I didn't know this, but researching this on Wikipedia, it looks like Seneca is the only surviving Roman tragic playwright, at least who wrote plays based on Greek mythology. So according to Wikipedia, there was a whole genre, I think it was called in Latin fabulae crepidata or something like that, which was Roman plays on Greek classical tragedy. So Roman version of Greek classical tragedy. And there were a whole bunch of authors writing in the genre at that time, but Seneca is the only one who survived. I think there are 9 plays in Seneca total, but this volume only has 2 from each author, continuing the theme of doing 2 from each author. So Oedipus and Medea. And Oedipus is the one I've read. Medea will be next, but Oedipus is the one I've read for now. So we already had Oedipus by Sophocles in this volume. Now we are doing Oedipus by Seneca, which is largely the same story. There are some differences. I might get around to talking about some of those differences later. But it's largely the same story. So this is Seneca's reworking of Sophocles' play, which in turn is Sophocles' reworking of the Greek tradition or the Greek myth. Now, I don't really have a lot of intelligent things to say about Seneca's Oedipus. I read it. I can talk about the plot points that were different from Sophocles if you want me to. But I don't really know what Seneca was trying to do. Like, we already have this play by Sophocles, which was famous in Seneca's time. So why did Seneca feel the need to rewrite it? What was Seneca trying to do in his version that was different than Sophocles? I don't really know. You'll have to forgive me on this. This is my first time through any of these plays, so I'm approaching all of this as a newbie. I did a little bit of research on Wikipedia. I watched a couple YouTube videos, and I'll try to integrate what I've learned into this review. But by and large, I'm not going to have a lot of intelligent things to say about this. So that being said, let me try and muddle through this and see what I do have to say. And I'm going to do my best to start at the beginning here and just give some basic background knowledge, because I'm aware that not everyone who watches this channel is familiar with some of this stuff. So Seneca was a Roman politician and philosopher and playwright and literary man. I've never read any of his stuff before, but I'm familiar with him by reputation. He lived during the tumultuous Julio-Claudian dynasty. Your Tiberius, your Caligula, your Claudius, and your Nero. So he pops up in some of the historical fiction that I've read about this period. He played a prominent part in The Flames of Rome by Paul Meyer, which I read way back when I was like in 9th grade, long before I started this channel. And also Claudius the God, which I did read on this channel, and I've reviewed that on this channel. But basically, he was in Roman politics. He became a tutor to Nero until Nero famously ordered him to commit suicide. So he was effectively killed by Nero. And was a big proponent of Stoic philosophy, which is, I think, his major claim to fame. Excuse me. And I didn't even realize this before, but his brother is in the New Testament. I guess his brother Gallio, who was proconsul of Achaia, appeared in the New Testament and allegedly had an encounter with Paul. That's Seneca's brother. So, okay, that's a bit of new information for me. So, like I said, in addition to everything else he did, Seneca apparently wrote 9 plays that were reworkings of Greek tragedy. This was apparently a genre at the time, but Seneca's play is the only one that has survived. There's an interesting translator's note here, which says that Seneca's play is modeled on Greek tragedies written 400 years before his time. So his idea of theater would be about as far from the Greeks' originals as a modern off-Broadway staging of Othello from Shakespeare's first London production. Yeah, that's interesting and good to keep in mind. You know, I don't know about you, but I sometimes will think of the ancient world as just kind of all one thing. But it's useful to remember that there are huge time passing between various events. So 400 years between Sophocles' play and Seneca's play. And the translator makes the point that Seneca would have different views of how to use the chorus and the nature of drama, etc. Now, as for the play itself, Oedipus, again, I'll try and give some brief, basic background on this. I already talked about this in my review of Oedipus the King by Sophocles, but I'll go back over it again briefly. The story of Oedipus is the story of a baby who was prophesied that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So the king and queen decided to have the baby killed by giving it to a servant who was supposed to expose the baby on the mountainside to die. The servant didn't do that. The servant ended up giving it to somebody else, who gave it to the neighboring king and queen of, where was it? Corinth, was it? I forget. A neighboring city. So Oedipus grew up with his adopted family. Then when Oedipus was a young man, he went to the Oracle of Delphi, and the Oracle of Delphi gave him the same prophecy, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So naturally disgusted and terrified by this prophecy, he fled home so that he would never be in danger of killing his father or marrying his mother, little knowing that he was actually running straight towards his parents, because his real parents were not his adopted parents. So on the way, he met a man on the road who he killed over an argument about the right of way. And then he came to the city of Thebes, and after saving the city of Thebes from the monster, the Sphinx, he ended up becoming the king and marrying the queen, who was actually his mother. Now, all of that is the backstory. The backstory to this play. The play opens with a plague covering the land of Thebes. The plague is covering the land of Thebes because the gods are upset about the incestuous and unnatural relations, as well as the king of Thebes having been killed and his murderer not punished. So Oedipus launches an investigation to try and find out who killed the old king of Thebes. And in the course of launching that investigation, he ends up finding that he himself was guilty of it, and then he ends up finding that he himself was the baby who was supposed to have been killed, and he's come back and killed his own father and married his own mother. So the original play by Sophocles, well, I say original, but all of these plays were reworking traditional stories that had been around for hundreds of years by the time of Sophocles. So part of the genius of Sophocles is taking this old legend, which everybody already knew and which he had inherited. He didn't create this story, but creating a very tense drama around the story, in which you get to see the emotions of Oedipus and his wife/mother Jocasta. And it's a very cleverly done play. I was just recently rewatching Steve Donahue's video on the Greek canon for his Western canon starter kit. And he said of this play, it's a very tight mousetrap of a story. So Oedipus, as he's uncovering evidence by evidence, he's just gradually putting in all the pieces until he finally discovers the horrible truth. And he suspects the truth probably midway through the play, but he doesn't actually get all the pieces confirming that until near the end of the play. So it's kind of one of the original whodunit type stories. Well, even though the audience already knows the answer, you get some sort of intellectual stimulation by seeing all these pieces snap into place as Oedipus uncovers one piece of evidence after another, until he is finally, there's no denying what has actually happened. So that was Sophocles' play. Seneca's play is largely the same story. Starts off with the plague. Oedipus is the king of Thebes. Oedipus is trying to figure out why there's a plague. He launches investigations, he interviews witnesses, and he eventually gets the same pieces of evidence confirming who he is and what he has done. So if it's largely the same story, that begs the question, why is Seneca writing it again? What is Seneca trying to do here? Now, there are differences. There are any number of differences, great and small. For example, in the play by Sophocles, Jocasta hangs herself, and Oedipus does not discover that she is dead until later. In this play, Jocasta takes Oedipus's sword and stabs herself right in front of Oedipus. To give another example, in the play by Sophocles, Oedipus stabs out his eyes with a sharp brooch or pin that was from the dead body of his wife/mother Jocasta. In this play, he tears out his eyes with his hands, and there's a rather gory description about him just kind of tearing the nerve endings out and the blood gushing forth from his eye sockets. As he tears out his eyes with his fingernails. And I'll come back to that. The gore in this may or may not be significant. But that's another difference. And there's, I don't know, 10 or 12 other notable differences between the plays. And if I don't want to list differences between the plays because I think that would be a rather pedantic and uninteresting way to review this. And it's all on Wikipedia anyways. You can go to look up Seneca's Oedipus by Wikipedia, and they have a list of all the changes that are Seneca made from Sophocles. But those changes aside, it is basically the same story. Now, you can see here that this translator has chosen to translate this in prose so that it's blocks of text, which is different than the way the Sophocles was translated in the Sophocles version, where the chorus was speaking in verse. But I don't know if that's a notable difference. I think according to the translator's note here, this was also originally in verse. And so maybe this is just something that the translator's decision to translate this in prose. And in fact, if we look ahead to the next play by Seneca, which is done by a different translator, this looks like much more of a verse translation. So that's one thing, or maybe it's not a thing, but there we have it. The other thing, I was trying to research what exactly Seneca was trying to do with this play here, because I mean, we could talk about all the same things we talked about when we talked about Sophocles' play. You know, how the pieces are gradually coming together, how Oedipus is a tragic figure, all that kind of stuff. But Sophocles already did all that. So what is Seneca doing in this play? Well, one of the things I came across when I was trying to research this is a number of critics have pointed out that in Sophocles' play, Oedipus starts out as very proud and arrogant and then is humbled by the end of the play when he finally realizes his fate. In this play here, Oedipus is starting off as a much more pathetic character who is, starting off from his very first soliloquy, talking about how he's scared for the future and all the creepy things that are happening with the kingdom. Oh, and speaking of the opening soliloquy, this is maybe something else which is interesting. I didn't know this beforehand, but I've learned it from reading the some of the notes and the essays accompanying this play in this collection. Seneca apparently had a very big influence on Elizabethan drama, and maybe more so than the Greek poets. Apparently that's because translations of Seneca were more widely available during the Elizabethan times, for whatever reason, but he was more widely read then. So the Shakespearean drama or the Elizabethan drama takes more cues from Seneca than it does from the ancient Greek poets, apparently. So the soliloquy that Oedipus opens up with in this version, in Seneca's version, again, is something that the Elizabethan playwrights and Shakespeare, in particular, would imitate. Okay, that's another interesting thing of note there. But we get, in this version, we get more description of the plague and its horrors in Seneca's Oedipus than we do in Sophocles' Oedipus. Now, one of the interesting things about Sophocles' Oedipus, which I believe I completely forgot to mention when I was talking about that in my previous video, but the play opens with a plague that's ravaging the city, and a king that's powerless to do it. And it's believed that this was written about the plague that, a historical plague that caused great suffering in Athens during the Peloponnesian War. And the leader of Athens, who was powerless to do it and was a proud figure who was kind of humbled by that plague, was a man named Pericles. So there's an argument, and I first heard this on Ryan Stitt's podcast. He did a podcast, The History of Ancient Greece, that Oedipus, the king, in Sophocles' version, is meant to be analogous to the Greek politician Pericles. And the plague in Oedipus, the king, Sophocles' version, is meant to stand in for the plague of Athens. But if that is true, what's interesting about that is we get very little description of the actual plague itself in Sophocles' version of Oedipus. But in Seneca's version of Oedipus, we get a lot more description of the plague and its horrors. And it's all in the soliloquy here. There's no escape from death for anyone, no distinction of age or sex. The sickness treats young men and old alike as fatal for fathers as their sons. Bedmates share the same pyre at funerals without tears. No one is left to mourn. A scourge, but the very nature of it has dried up our tears, etc. It talks about the suffering the people are suffering during the plague. Even though, correct me if I'm wrong, but there wasn't any big plague that swept through Rome during Seneca's time, right? So Seneca wouldn't have had that same familiarity with the plague that Sophocles did. And yet Seneca's version is the one that is giving much more vivid descriptions of the plague. So that's interesting. And speaking of Seneca's description of the plague, when I was trying to find YouTube videos about this to kind of do some research on it, one of the videos I found was a video that got put out a couple years ago, which was about ancient literature and plagues, which was put out during the COVID shutdown period. So it was some university had done a whole symposium or lecture series on talking about the plague descriptions in ancient literature as part of their response to COVID. So that's available on YouTube. I'll try and remember to link to everything I talk about in the description down below. The other video I found on YouTube, which I'll try to remember to link to in the description down below, is a presentation by a student at I believe a Canadian university, making the case that Seneca's Oedipus is one of the first examples of the horror genre. So he makes the case that it's more or less the same story as Sophocles, but Seneca's version is a lot more horrific and a lot more gory. So these horrific descriptions of the plague, for example, come into that. There's some descriptions of sacrifices, animal sacrifices gone wrong in Seneca's version of Oedipus, which, again, this young man is making the case that this is supposed to evoke feelings of terror and horror. And of course, then the gore I alluded to earlier. In Sophocles' version, Oedipus just stabs out his eyes. Here we get a much more gory description of him tearing out his eyeballs with his fingernails and the blood gushing and yanking out the nerve endings and stuff like that. So that's... I mean, watch the whole video to get the full thrust of his argument. He makes a good case for it, that this is perhaps meant to evoke kind of horror or terror or some sort of scary story, or maybe a creepy story or some sort of ghost story type element to it. Which is brings me to another point, something I forgot to mention. This play may not have ever been staged. It could be that Seneca just wrote it for his friends and his friends read it, but it never got staged, at least not during Seneca's lifetime. Apparently, it was staged during the Elizabethan age when, again, Seneca was having his revival. And it has been staged in the modern times as well. In fact, at the end of this, there's a description of a couple of different stagings of this. Peter Brooks' Oedipus, there's an essay reviewing that at the end of this collection. The translator makes the point that this can be quite a long play for a modern audience to sit through. See, it says, it has been produced like this in modern times, although I must admit at the National's first night, I saw a member of the audience faint. So he says, if the play is to be done without interruption, it is important to give the audience good warning. So, yeah, that being said, it's not so long. I read it in a couple of sittings. I was looking at the audiobook version of it on YouTube, and it's not much more than an hour. So, I don't know, maybe it's just the style of the play makes the audience faint. I don't know. Yeah, which brings me to my final point. I don't know. Like I said, I don't really know what Seneca was trying to do here. I've mentioned some other things I've picked up from other people. Maybe that's it. Maybe there's more to it. So, as always, I would invite anyone who knows anything about this and wants to educate me, feel free to chime in the comments. Let me know exactly what Seneca was trying to do on this. But I think I'll leave it off here. I think I've said everything I can say about it. So there's one more play by Seneca in this collection. That's Medea. This is also retreading ground from earlier in the collection. So I've already read Euripides' Medea. Now on to Seneca's Medea. And will I have anything intelligent to say about Seneca's Medea? I guess we'll have to wait and see. So this is the next play to read from this collection. All right, where's the off button?